what it was like to grow old in ancient times. The first silver strand, the meaning of aging in the ancient world. Close your eyes, let your body relax beneath the weight of time, not time as a burden, but time as a gentle companion, a witness, a guide, a story written softly into the skin. Tonight, we begin not in one place, but in many, in stone cities and desert kingdoms, under olive trees and paper lanterns, where age was not always feared, and wrinkles were once called the maps of wisdom. Let us begin in a quiet Roman villa. The year is 22 BCE. A man named Gaius, once a soldier, now rests on a wooden bench in his courtyard. He watches the sunlight dance across his olive grove. His hair, once black like volcanic rock, is now streaked with silver, and to his grandchildren, who gather at his feet, he is not weak, he is the archive of their lineage. In Rome, growing old was a shift in status. If you reached the age of 60, you could serve as a senex, the root of our word senator. To be older was, in many ways, to grow more visible. Your opinion was consulted, your memory was revered, your presence was recorded, but age also brought legal transformation. An elder Roman could be exempt from certain taxes, excused from military service, and even protected from punishment in some minor offenses, not from pity, but from assumed dignity. And yet, old age was not always gentle. There were no painkillers, no modern comforts. The body aged faster, joints stiffened early, bones grew fragile, and still, many elders lived with purpose. They taught, recited poetry, gave advice in forums, or simply walked the streets in slow, respected rhythm. Let us move now to ancient Greece. In Athens, aging was seen as a step toward philosophical refinement. Socrates himself spoke of old age as a liberation, a time when desires fade, and the soul begins to speak more clearly. Greek elders were often consulted before political decisions. Some even served as judges, mentors, or advisors in symposiums, where wisdom held more weight than beauty or strength. But even here, aging came with paradox. Some playwrights mocked the elderly as stubborn or ridiculous, and poor elders, especially those without family, could find themselves begging near temples, forgotten by the very polis that once honored their youth. In both Rome and Greece, how you aged depended on how you had lived. An elder warrior, you were venerated, a scholar, quoted a laborer with no land, forgotten now. Let the winds carry us further east, to the lands of ancient China. Here, growing old was not just respected, it was sacred. The teachings of Confucius declared filial piety, devotion to one's parents and elders, as a cornerstone of virtue. To ignore or insult an elder was not only shameful, but sometimes punishable by law. Elders were honored in poetry, their birthdays marked with ceremony, their advice recorded like scripture. Aging, in this world, was seen as a return to the origin, not decline, but preparation for rebirth, reunion with ancestors, or passage into immortality of name, even in death. An elder's ancestral tablet might be placed on the family altar, where offerings were made regularly, keeping memory alive as if it still breathed. But again, reality had its cracks. During times of famine, even Confucian law could not feed everyone. Some elders, unwilling to burden their families, chose to wander into the mountains alone, a quiet surrender to nature, seen by some as noble, by others as tragic. And so we see, even in worlds so different, aging was always a threshold, a transformation. Sometimes honored, sometimes feared, always inevitable. You, listener, may not yet wear the silver crown, or perhaps you already do. But tonight, in the soft glow of these ancient stories, you are invited to see age not as an enemy, but as a quiet lantern carried through time. In our next chapter, we will explore how elders were cared for in different civilizations, from family-centered homes to communal responsibility, and even the strange rituals surrounding elderhood. But now, let your breath slow. That torch of memory burns gently tonight, and whether young or old, you are timeless here. Sleep well. Tomorrow, we walk again. The hands that cared, how the elderly were treated and protected. The night deepens, and across centuries of soil and stone, the old still sit waiting, watching, remembered in silence. But how were they held, housed, and honored? Tonight, we walk gently through ancient homes and humble huts, palaces and plains, to see what hands reached out and which ones pulled away as age arrived. Let us return first to ancient China, where the teachings of Confucius echoed in every village. The foundation of society was the family, and within it, the elder was the root. Children were expected to care for aging parents, not just with food and shelter, but with reverence. To raise one's voice against a parent was shameful. To ignore a parent's needs was immoral and illegal. One ancient legal code, the Tent Code, imposed punishments for those who abandoned or disrespected their elders, even as adults. Sons who failed to provide rice, daughters who delayed visits, all could be publicly shamed or fined. The elder was the center of the household. They didn't ask for help, they commanded it, and as long as breath filled their lungs, they had a voice in decisions, in rituals, in legacy. Yet, beneath the honor, there lived quiet hardship. In poor families, where mouths were many and harvests were thin, caring for the elderly could become a silent burden. Some elders, sensing this, would quietly eat less, sleep in corners, and eventually fade, not from neglect, but from quiet selflessness. Now, let us drift west to the Greek city-states. Here, treatment of elders varied deeply. Wealthy households, grandparents often helped raise children, told stories by the hearth, and passed down oral traditions. It was not unusual to see 3 or even 4 generations under one roof, each age with its rhythm. But in Sparta, a city built on strength and war, the elderly had a different fate. Only those who had served bravely in battle were allowed to age with honor. A man who had not proven himself in war might be ignored in later life, denied respect, excluded from councils. And yet, even in Sparta, there were rituals where old men judged the songs of youth or debated in circles of equals. Athens, on the other hand, valued age for its intellect. Elders served on councils like the Areopagus, advising on laws and justice. They were not nursed into silence. They were amplified in public discourse. But in times of plague or famine, all civilizations struggled, and so did the old. No city was immune to the quiet tragedy of too many mouths, not enough bread. Let us move now to ancient Egypt. Here, the elders were considered wise and sacred, especially scribes and priests, who often served well into old age. Tombs and murals depict gray-haired figures teaching younger apprentices, blessing rituals, or sitting peacefully beside the Nile. Families lived in extended units, where age meant spiritual closeness to the afterlife. An elder was already half in the next world, a guide across the veil. Care often came from daughters-in-law, or servants, and while physical comfort was limited by the tools of the time, respect was woven into every gesture. There are even recorded letters from sons to mothers promising warm linen, oil for the joints, bread with dates, simple offerings of care. But as always, class mattered. A noble elder might pass his final years in a painted villa, a peasant elder in a corner of a dusty hut, joints stiff, back bent, but still the voice of memory in the household. In Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi even included laws about the treatment of elderly parents, threatening neglect and punishment for disrespect. Across all these lands, one thread remains. To grow old was to become fragile, but also powerful. You might lose your strength, but gain stories. You might limp, but be leaned upon. You might forget names, but never be forgotten. Until, of course, society changed. In later empires, when urban life grew cold and distant, elders sometimes became invisible, sent away, ignored, or remembered only through names carved into stone. And yet, in many small homes, far from palaces and scrolls, the oldest among them still sat by the fire, holding a grandchild's hand, telling the stories that would outlive even their bones. In our next chapter, we will explore how the elderly faced illness and mortality, and the ways in which different civilizations understood the final seasons of life. But now, rest. You have walked among kind hands, full hearts, and quiet sacrifices. Let their warmth wrap around you like a soft blanket of time. Sleep gently. The past is still here, and it remembers you too. Illness, frailty, and the final seasons of life. The wind is slower now. It no longer rushes, but drifts, like the breath of someone sitting still, watching the world from a shaded window. And in that quiet rhythm, age whispers its softest song, not of glory or greatness, but of slowing, of surrender, of the sacred stillness that comes before farewell. Tonight, we walk with the elders as they face illness, frailty, and the truth. All flesh eventually learns that even stone crumbles. But how did the ancient world confront the decline of the body? How did it treat the long twilight between strength and silence? Let us begin in ancient Egypt, the land of embalmed kings and sun-drenched rituals. Despite their reverence for the afterlife, the Egyptians had rudimentary medicine to ease suffering. Elders were often treated with oils, compresses, and herbal tinctures made from honey, garlic, myrrh, and juniper. Scribes left behind scrolls detailing remedies for aching joints, weakened eyes, and breathless chests, ailments all too familiar with old age. Still, in families that could afford it, care was personal. Daughters often became the final hands that held their parents. Sons sent physicians or read poetry aloud to ease the mind's passing. Now, let us step into the Roman world once again. In Rome, health and illness were matters not only of medicine, but of honor. To die in bed, surrounded by family, was the ideal. To die unnoticed, alone, or in disgrace, was feared above all. Roman physicians used scalpels, wine-soaked cloths, poultices made of vinegar and herbs. But the best medicine for the elderly was often companionship. To sit beside a dying elder, to quote Virgil or Cicero, to feed them grapes or olives, to touch their hands. This was not just kindness, it was duty still. Not all aged gently. Some elders, especially those without heirs or wealth, faded into poverty, becoming silent shadows of the great cities they once served. Old soldiers, once mighty, were sometimes left to beg at temples. Widows, without sons, became dependent on the generosity of neighbors or kind priests. And then there were the rituals of acceptance. In many Roman homes, when death approached, family members would gather. The dying would kiss each child. They might whisper a final blessing. Then, the eldest son would close their eyes with 2 fingers, a sacred act known as the conclamatio, which marked the soul's departure. In Mesopotamia, illness was often seen as the result of spiritual imbalance. The old might be visited by a priest who would chant prayers, burn incense, or place protective amulets near the bed. Here, healing was not always about curing, but about calming. And what of India? In its ancient Vedic traditions, aging was not an end, but a stage of spiritual ascension. Many elders, after raising families and fulfilling their duties, entered the phase of vanaprastha, the forest dweller. They would retreat from worldly affairs, eat simple food, meditate, and prepare for the next life. Sickness, in this context, was not punishment, it was the body releasing its hold, and death, a homecoming. Across all these civilizations, the decline of the body was met with varying degrees of medicine, prayer, care, and acceptance, sometimes gentle, sometimes harsh, always human. In our next chapter, we will walk through the beliefs about life after death, how different ancient cultures imagined the journey beyond the final breath, and how those visions comforted the old in their final days. But for now, breathe slowly. You have walked through candlelit rooms, heard the rasp of final words, and felt the hush of sacred partings. Let that stillness cradle you. You are safe, you are timeless, and sleep is just another passage. Beyond the final breath, visions of the afterlife across civilizations. Let your breath become lighter. Let your thoughts slow like a river reaching the sea. For tonight, we walk a path few have described, and none have returned from. We walk the passage beyond breath, as seen by the elders of the ancient world. To understand how the old faced death, we must look not at how they died, but at what they believed waited after. In every ancient culture, the end of life was not truly the end. It was a transition, a crossing, a return, or sometimes a test. Let us begin where eternity was carved in stone. Ancient Egypt. To the Egyptians, death was not darkness, it was a journey. That an elder approaching their final days was believed to be preparing to meet Osiris, the god of the underworld. But the path was not simple. The soul or Ba had to pass through 12 gates, each guarded by spirits who asked questions and judged purity. Then came the weighing of the heart. In a silent hall, the heart of the departed would be placed on one side of a golden scale. On the other side, the feather of Mahat, goddess of truth. If the heart was lighter, the soul entered the eternal field of reeds, a paradise of calm waters and green harvest. If heavier, the soul was devoured by Amit and ceased to exist. This belief shaped how Egyptians aged. The old were expected to reflect, to confess, to align themselves with balance, To die peacefully was not just comfort, it was preparation. They were not afraid of death, they were preparing to answer for how they lived. Now we step into ancient Greece, where the afterlife was both mysterious and melancholic. To the Greeks, the soul or psyche would leave the body as a breath, sometimes depicted as a butterfly or a small figure with wings. It would travel to the underworld, ruled by Hades. At the edge of life, the soul stood before the river Styx, waiting to be ferried across by Charon the boatman. But Charon demanded payment, a coin placed in the mouth of the deceased. Without it, the soul would wander, restless and forgotten. Beyond the river lay 3 destinations: the fields of asphodel, 4 ordinary souls, a grey, neutral eternity; the Elysian fields, for heroes and virtuous souls, a paradise of light and music; Tartarus, a pit of punishment for those who defied the gods. Elders often spoke of dreams where their deceased ancestors appeared, guiding them, warning them, preparing them. The afterlife was not feared, but it was uncertain. So, many lived their final years offering sacrifices, burning incense, and speaking the names of the dead, to ensure they would not be forgotten in turn. Let us walk now to ancient Rome, where the afterlife mirrored Greece, but with Roman formality. Romans believed that spirits of the dead, the manes, lingered. Each February, families celebrated Parentalia, a 9-day festival honoring the dead. Offerings of wine, flowers, and bread were made at tombs. To forget your ancestors was not just rude, it was a spiritual offense. Elders, nearing death, would often speak of preparing to become shadows, umbri, not as ghosts, but as quiet observers. Their names would be inscribed, their virtues remembered, and if their tombs were honored, their spirits would protect the family. To die unremembered, that was the real fear. Now we cross to the east, to the spiritual landscape of ancient India. Here, the soul, or Atman, was eternal, moving through lifetimes like a candle lighting another candle. Death was not an end, but a passage to the next incarnation. An elder might believe that how they faced old age would influence their next birth. If they died with regret, bitterness, or attachment, they might return as a lesser form. But if they passed with peace, truth, and detachment, they would rise closer to moksha, the final liberation from rebirth. Funeral fires were sacred, ashes scattered in rivers, and the names of the dead were chanted for years, keeping their energy in motion, helping their soul journey onward. In China, deeply influenced by ancestor veneration, the afterlife was a place not of distance, but continued presence. The dead lived among the living, watching, guiding, and protecting. Families offered food, burned spirit, money, and kept ancestral tablets in their homes. To be remembered was to live forever, and to grow old was not to prepare to leave, but to prepare to become part of the family in another form. Even in death, the elder remained. And so, across civilizations, Egypt, Greece, Rome, India, China, we find a shared truth. The old did not fear death the way we often do. They prepared for it, named it, faced it with ritual, poetry, story, and song. They believed they would continue as stars, as memories, as breath in the wind. In our final chapter, we will reflect on the legacy of aging and how those who walk before us still shape how we understand time, family, wisdom, and ourselves. But for now, rest. You are held in the arms of memory, and the voices of the past whisper not of endings, but of peace. Sleep softly. Tomorrow, we complete the journey, the eternal echo, wisdom, memory, and the legacy of the elders. The fire is low now, its glow is soft, its warmth steady. And in that golden silence, we return, not to the past, but to the echo it left inside us. Tonight, we ask a question the ancients once whispered by moonlight. What remains when the body fades? What lives on when footsteps stop? The answer, everywhere we've wandered, has been the same: wisdom, memory, story. In ancient Egypt, elders were seen not as fading bodies, but as living scrolls. They carried the names of ancestors, the rituals of seasons, the secrets of the stars. To ignore an elder was to lose a chapter of one's own history. To sit beside them was to sit beside the river of time. In Greece, philosophers often sought out the elderly, not for instruction, but for reflection. Socrates, nearing his own death, said that the soul of an old person was like a worn instrument, quieter, but more attuned. He believed old age brought a clarity not found in youth. and that truth often spoke only after the body had softened its grip on desire. In Rome, poets wrote of their aging fathers with reverence. They described the sound of their sandals on stone, the curve of their backs like ancient bridges, the way they recited verses even as their sight dimmed. The Roman elder was not just a parent, he was a pillar, holding up the structure of memory. In India, wisdom was not an achievement, it was a state of being. The elder was a sage in training, a soul polishing itself for the next realm. Old age was not decay, it was purification. Even silence, in those final years, was seen as sacred. To speak less was to listen more. To move less was to feel more. And to age was to rise in truth. In China, memory became a ritual. A name, spoken on the anniversary of a death, was said to vibrate in the spirit world, feeding the soul, awakening it. Elders taught children not only how to live, but how to remember. They taught that to honor those who came before was to prepare to be honored yourself. And what of those elders who left no children, no home, no wealth, no heir? They, too, lived on in the dust of temples, in songs half remembered, in stories passed between strangers. For wisdom never truly dies, it only changes form. Perhaps this is the truest legacy of aging in the ancient world, that time does not steal from us. It transforms us, that the young dance like fire, the old burn like embers, both offer light. And so, even now, in this modern world of speed and glass and steel, the old ones still speak, not through words, but through the ways we live, the rituals we repeat, the lullabies we hum without knowing who first sang them. Tonight, you have walked with them. You have sat by their fires, heard their coughs, their laughter, their last words. You have seen that to grow old is not to fade, but to become part of the thread that binds generations together. So when you next meet an elder, perhaps you'll look a little longer, not with pity, but with awe, because within them is a library, a constellation, a bridge. And one day, you too will carry that light. Let your breath slow. You are not alone. The ancients walk with you. The wisdom of ages rests beside you. And in the hush of this night, you are not young or old. You are eternal. Sleep well, keeper of memory. The past has spoken, and it sleeps now. With you, the tools of time. How ancient people treated the aging body. In the quiet folds of time, the body begins to whisper, not in pain, but in reminders, a slower step, a hand that trembles, a gaze that lingers longer before it focuses. And so, the ancient world responded, not always with cures, but with care. Tonight, we walk among the tools and remedies of the old, the oils, herbs, rituals, and philosophies that sought to honor the aging body rather than silence it. Let us begin where wisdom was measured in scent. Ancient Egypt. Egyptians believed that aging was not a disease, it was a transformation. And with it came new needs. For joints that ached under the weight of years, they offered ointments of honey, castor oil, and frankincense. For memory that wandered, priests recommended myrrh and lotus. And for breath that grew shallow, one might burn juniper, letting its smoke enter the lungs like a slow prayer. Old men chewed herbs to keep their teeth strong. Old women dyed their hair with henna to restore the color of youth, not from vanity, but as a ritual of continuity. And always there were ritual baths in milk, in salt, in oils, as if to remind the skin it was still sacred. Now we drift to ancient Greece, where medicine was both art and observation. Hippocrates taught that the body contained for humors blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that aging was the cooling and drying of these essences. For the elderly, Greek physicians advised warm water with honey in the morning, light walking before meals, figs, olives, and soft breads to ease digestion, and above all, rest without idleness. Stillness was treated with herbs, but also with music. It was believed that certain modes, like the Dorian or Phrygian, could soothe the heart and awaken lost clarity. An elder might sit in a shaded courtyard, a lyre playing softly nearby, as their physician simply observed their breathing. No rush, only rhythm. In Rome, care became more formal. There were apothecaries with scrolls of remedies for every ache. Galen, the great Roman physician, wrote entire volumes on how to care for elders, what to feed them, how to bathe them, when to allow wine and when to forbid it. Roman baths were central to aging well. Even the old were encouraged to bathe, to stretch, to be massaged with olive oil and crushed rose petals. Caregivers were taught to speak softly, to warm the bedstones at night, to leave food where it could be reached without effort. And when blindness came, a child might read aloud, not just to inform, but to preserve the elder's voice inside the household. In India, the aging body was seen as a mirror of the soul state. Ayurveda, the science of life, prescribed ghee, turmeric, ashwagandha, and meditation. Old age was governed by vata dosha, the energy of movement and space, which, when imbalanced, caused weakness, anxiety, and fulness. To care for an elder meant balancing their energy, warm meals, gentle oils, silence between words, and the presence of the earth, sitting on the floor, touching wood, drinking from clay. In China, traditional medicine honored elders through key life force. As qi declined with age, it was supported with ginseng, goji berries, acupuncture, and tai chi. Movements were slow, circular, never forced. Even pressure points on the feet were massaged to awaken distant organs. Families brewed soups with medicinal roots. Grandchildren learned which teas to bring, and temples often offered free diagnoses to elders as a sign of social respect. All across the ancient world, the body in age was not ignored. It was interpreted, listened to, wrapped in cloth, scented with oil, walked beside rather than ahead of. The tools of time were not just physical, they were gestures. A bowl placed within reach, a song remembered and sung again, a warm hand placed gently on a cooler one. In our next chapter, we will explore the roles that elders held in the spiritual life of their communities as seers, sages, keepers of the sacred, and voices that guided the living beyond what eyes could see. But for now, rest. You have walked gently through temples of bone and breath, and the memory of those ancient hands still reaches out to comfort you. Don't sleep well. The body rests, but your story continues. Elders as spiritual guides, the voice beyond the veil. We don't walk through palaces or city squares. We walk through temples, shrines, and the quiet edges of firelight, where the voices of the old were not only heard, they were revered. Across the ancient world, age was not merely a number of years, it was a signal to listen more deeply, to ask questions of the one who had seen the stars rise and fall more times than most could count. Let us begin in ancient Mesopotamia, where the oldest members of society were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Elders interpreted dreams, they carried fragments of prophecy. They remembered floods, eclipses, strange seasons, and what had followed. A gray-haired woman who had once been a priestess might sit outside the temple gate, holding a bowl of water and a feather. She didn't need to speak. People simply came, placed coins in silence, and whispered what they feared. Wisdom didn't shout in those times. It waited. In ancient Egypt, priests and scribes often reached old age within the temple itself. An elder priest knew the timing of every celestial shift. He had memorized the Book of the Dead by heart. He could recite the prayers to guide the soul across the 12 hours of night. Younger priests would follow his pace, repeat his chants, mirror the way he folded the linen cloth over the sacred statues. In their final years, these men became part of the temple, as if the stone held their breath, and the incense knew their names. Even in death, their role continued. Their tombs were adorned, not just with gold, but with phrases like, "He who saw beyond the veil, the scribe of the hidden truth." Let us cross into Greece, where oracles and philosophers aged into their insight. At Delphi, the Pythia, the oracle priestess, was often a woman of advanced age, chosen for her spiritual purity, but also her stillness, her discipline, her ability to hold silence long enough to feel something more. In the agora, older philosophers would sit in the shade, surrounded by listeners, not because their voices were loud, but because they had learned when not to speak. Plato wrote that an elder's wisdom was closer to the divine, for they no longer hunger to win, only to know. In India, the rishi, the sage, was often grey-haired, barefooted, and nearly silent. He might live in a hut at the edge of a forest. People would come not to ask questions, but to sit near him. Just being in his presence was believed to change your energy. An elder who had passed through family life, through responsibility, and into solitude, was seen as an awakened soul. They no longer needed status or wealth. They were tuning their spirit toward the infinite. In China, spiritual lineage was passed through generations, not through books, but through breath. A Taoist elder might walk a mountain path with a disciple at his side, saying nothing until the wind turned. Then he might stop, place a stone on the ground, and say, "There is your answer." The meaning wasn't in the words, it was in the rhythm, the timing, the pause. And among common families, grandmothers were often the first to explain rituals to children: which candle to light, which ancestor's name to speak, which direction to face. When bowing in their trembling hands were decades of unwritten ritual memory. Even in Rome, where politics often overshadowed mysticism, the household elder was the guardian of domestic religion. They kept the Narration, the shrine, two household gods. They tended the flame. They reminded the family of who had died and when to honor them. Their presence in the home was like the quiet flicker of a lantern, never demanding attention, but always there, always watching. In all these lands, the elder was a bridge between the known and the unknown, between this world and the next, between fear and faith. They were not saints, they were not perfect, but they were trusted, not for their strength, but for their stillness. In our next chapter, we will explore how different ancient cultures portrayed elders in their myths, legends, and literature, and how these stories shaped the way aging was viewed by generations to come. But for now, allow silence to return. You have walked beside sages, dream readers, and spirit keepers. You have felt the hush of candlelit wisdom. Let it wrap around you like a shawl. Sleep deeply. The veil is thin tonight, and the wise are watching. The elder in the story, aging in myths, legends, and ancient literature. Stories are older than stone. They traveled by breath before they were ever carved into clay or inked on scrolls. And in those stories, from every corner of the ancient world, one figure often appears, not as a hero of strength, but as a keeper of time. The elder. Tonight, we walk not through streets or temples, but through tales. Tales where age is a gift, a warning, a guide, a mirror. Let us begin among the Greeks, who gave us sagas of gods and men. In the Odyssey, Odysseus returns home after decades at sea, older, wiser, and changed. But before his son or wife recognizes him, it is his old nurse Euryclea who sees a scar on his foot and knows at once. She weeps, not just from joy, but from memory. In that moment, Homer shows us that the old are the ones who remember who we truly are, even when we forget. And then there is Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, ancient, weathered, but all-seeing. Though physically frail, his mind moves between worlds. Kings bow to his words. Gods speak through his silence. In Greek myth, the elderly are not symbols of decay. They are portals. In Mesopotamian legend, we meet Utnapishtim, the only human, granted immortality after surviving the Great Flood. When Gilgamesh, the young king, seeks eternal life, it is Utnapishtim who speaks of futility, of acceptance, of the river of time that carries all things away. He is not a hero. He is a reminder. Sometimes, wisdom isn't what saves us. It's what humbles us. In ancient India, the Mahabharata and Ramayana are filled with elders whose words shape destinies. Bhishma, the grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, chooses to die only when he wills it, lying on a bed of arrows, giving lessons in Dharma until his final breath. He is a warrior, yes, but more than that, he is a moral compass. His voice in those last chapters becomes softer, slower, as if echoing through the corridors of generations. In China, legends tell of Laozi, the old master, who rode an ox into the mountains, leaving behind the Tao Te Ching, a book of simple verses with depths deeper than empires. He speaks not of conquest, but of water, not of victory, but of surrender, not of shouting, but of waiting. In these tales, the elder is never in the center of the stage, but the story turns round them, like the stars round the pole in Rome. Literature honors the elder in quieter ways. In Virgil's Aeneid, old Anchises is carried on his son's shoulders as they flee burning Troy. He cannot walk, he cannot fight, but he carries the memory of the ancestors, the Pineates, the household gods, and because of him, the lineage survives. Even the lawgiver, Numa Pompilius, second king of Rome, is remembered not for battle, but for his wisdom in old age, his peacemaking, his sacred rituals that would shape Roman identity for centuries. Beyond myth, ancient proverbs also honored the aged. The tree with the deepest roots weathers the harshest winds. Ask not the stars, but the old man who watched them. A river forgets its source only when it dries. These sayings lived in kitchens and fields, passed from mouth to mouth, from wrinkled lips to wide eyes. Even among the Nordic sagas, native oral traditions, and African griots, we find a shared reverence for the elder who tells the tale not to boast, but to bind the past to the present. Stories are how cultures remember what aging feels like, and elders are the ones who remember what stories feel like before they were written down. They are not characters, they are anchors. They are the beginning and the echo dot. In our next chapter, we will explore the art and symbolism of aging in ancient visual culture, how sculpture, painting, and pottery depicted the elderly not just as bodies, but as meanings. But, for now, listen to the fading rhythm of the tale. Let the voice of the past settle like snow on the edges of your heart. You are part of a story older than you can name, and tonight it sings you to sleep. Faces of time, how the elderly were depicted in ancient art tonight. We do não abrimos livros, mas paredes. Não lemos palavras, lemos rostos, porque antes que existisse a escrita, o ser humano já desenhava. Antes que contássemos os anos, já gravávamos rugas em pedra e nesses tracos, suaves ou severos, esculpidos ou pintados, vemos não apenas figuras, mas o que cada cultura acreditava sobre o envelhecer. Let us begin in the silent tombs of ancient Egypt. On the walls, elders appear seated calm, composed, hands open in rest. Rarely do they show frailty. Instead, they are portrayed as keepers of order, participating in rituals, overseeing offerings, reciting from scrolls. In Egyptian art, age was not a physical trait, it was a social role. Even the gods who guided souls to the afterlife, Thoth, Osiris, were often shown with wise eyes and serene features. Ageless, yet ancient. The absence of wrinkles didn't mean denial of age. It meant elevation, a suggestion that growing old meant becoming more divine, less human. Now, step into the sculpted world of ancient Greece. Here, the elderly were portrayed with astonishing realism. Stone faces with sunken cheeks, lined brows, veined hands, curved backs. Philosophers like Socrates and Homer were sculpted not as idealized youths, but as aged men, bold, heavy-browed, contemplative. Even in pottery, you'll find images of old women bent over baskets, old men leaning on staffs, toothless but expressive. The Greeks admired beauty, yes, but they also respected truth, and aging, to them, was truth made visible. These depictions weren't always flattering, but they were honest, and sometimes gentle. In contrast, Roman portraiture took this realism even further. Busts of senators, generals, and patriarchs were often commissioned to highlight age, not hide it. Why? Because age meant virtue, wrinkles meant wisdom, crow's feet meant loyalty, loose skin around the eyes meant a man had seen things and remembered them. To die with a smooth face was almost shameful. To be sculpted with lines was a badge of honor. In the Republic era, there was even a trend of verism, a style where artists exaggerated aging, carving every fold and furrow with deliberate care. These weren't just faces, they were timelines. In India, art portrayed the elderly in ways more symbolic than physical. A sage might have a white beard, but his body remained lean and composed. Here, age was suggested not by flesh, but by posture. A seated rishi beneath a tree, a grandmother offering rice with a gentle hand, a sadhu in meditation, wrapped in simple cloth, the wrinkles carved not on the face, but into the flow of the robe. Aging, in Indian art, was stillness, a kind of surrender. And in China, scroll paintings and ink art often showed elders as figures in harmony with nature. A hunched man walking under pines, a grey-haired scholar beside a waterfall, a village elder tending bonsai or reading under the moon. There was no shame in age, only rhythm. The curve of a back echoed the bend of a branch. The thinness of the body mirrored the delicacy of mist. Even in indigenous cave paintings across continents, we find clusters of smaller figures gathered around one, often taller, often marked with patterns. The elder, the one who spoke without voice, taught without motion, watched while others danced. Art did not always show the elderly in focus. Sometimes they stood at the edge of the image, quiet and observing, but always they were there because to paint the world without its elders was to paint a story without memory. In our final chapter, we will explore what aging truly meant, not just for the person growing older, but for the culture that watched them fade, and what that tells us about ourselves today. But for now, let the brushstrokes of the past settle around you. You are surrounded by countless faces, some smiling, some solemn, all watching gently through time. Rest. You are art in motion, and time is only another layer. The final lesson, what the ancients teach us about aging tonight. We reached the last curve in the road. The lamps are dim, the voices are low, but the lesson lingers. In every civilization we've walked through, from desert tombs to mountain temples, from marble courts to moonlit forests, the elders left behind not just bones, but meanings, and perhaps the greatest of them all is this: to age is not to vanish. To age is to become visible in a different light. In the ancient world, aging was a kind of alchemy. The body softened, the pace slowed, but something else, something inside began to shine more brightly. It wasn't youth, or strength, or beauty, it was presence. Let us return briefly to the places we visited, not to repeat, but to reflect. In Egypt, aging was a preparation for a journey through stars and judgment, through scales and feathers. It taught us that what you carry in your heart matters more than what you wear on your face. In Greece, aging was the threshold to philosophy. It was where the mind turned inward, where questions replaced battles, and the hero became the teacher. In Rome, aging meant dignity. Wrinkles were not hidden, they were public virtue. The old held memory, and memory shaped the state. In India, aging was transcendence. Each phase of life had a purpose. The elder stepped back, not in defeat, but in liberation, toward stillness, simplicity, and silence. In China, aging was harmony. It flowed like water. Through generations, the old were the roots that held the tree, invisible but essential. And in every one of these places, the old were not feared. They were consulted. They were not discarded. They were included, not always perfectly, not always universally, but deeply enough that the echoes still reach us. Today, we live fast, we chase time, we fear age as if it were failure. But the ancients remind us, aging is not the loss of time, it is the proof that time was lived. They remind us that memory needs a vessel, that stories need a voice, that wisdom, like wine or stone, takes time to form. So if you are young, listen. Find the elders, not just in years, but in experience. Ask them what they remember, and listen with more than ears. And if you are aging, or feel age in your heart, know this: you are not fading, you are deepening. You are the fire at dusk, not the flame at noon. And in your silence, the entire worlds can be heard. The ancients didn't just build temples and laws, they built a way of seeing old age, not as retreat, but as return. Return to rhythm. Return to meaning. Return to soul. Tonight, let that truth settle in your breath. You are not too late. You are not too far. You are exactly where time intended you to be. And as you close your eyes, may you feel the presence of those who came before, not as ghosts, but as guides. Their hands rest on your shoulders. Their voices echo softly in your chest. Their lessons are now yours to carry. Sleep then, not as someone escaping the day, but as someone returning to the place where wisdom waits. You are timeless, you are held, and the story is not over, not even now.